The great bronze-handled doors of the Oakhaven Historical Society Library, usually stoic guardians of accumulated time, rattled in their ancient frames with a violence that mirrored the storm's fury. Rain driven by a wind that shrieked like a banshee, hammered against the tall, arched Gothic windows, transforming the muted gaslight glow of the deserted market street into shivering, aquatic apparitions. Inside the vast main reading room, with its towering shelves disappearing into shadowed heights, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb waiting for its next occupant. Eleanor Vance, archivist, and by virtue of her dwindling salary, reluctant sentinel of Oakhaven's meticulously catalogued but largely ignored past, shivered. The shiver wasn't entirely from the draft seeping through the ill-fitting window frames. It was the oppressive weight of centuries pressed into brittle leather bindings, the scent of decaying paper and forgotten lives, and the unnerving symphony of the storm that clawed at her nerves. She was for the third painstaking hour attempting to decipher the execrable handwriting in a newly acquired collection of letters from a minor 19th century poet, whose chief claim to fame seemed to be an astonishingly prolific output of terrible verse. Her back, a constant nagging ache these days, protested with a sharp twinge. The unopened cream-colored envelope from the Oak Knoll Care Facility tucked ominously into her satchel felt like a lead weight in her pocket. Another reminder of overdue payments for her mother's care, another impossible sum to conjure from her meager earnings. She sighed, pushing a stray strand of mousy brown hair from her eyes. Then a sound sharper than the wind's lament, more metallic than the groan of the ancient building, sliced through the rhythmic, solemn tick-tock of the regulator grandfather clock in the main hall. A frantic, brutal crash, as if the heavy brass mail slot on the front doors had been subjected to a violent assault followed by a distinct splintering thud. Eleanor's head snapped up her tired body, instantly taut. Her heart, startled from its weary rhythm, began to thud, a sudden panic tattoo against her ribs. It was well past closing. Only she and Mr. Finch, the director, remained. Before she could even push her chair back, the rarely used side entrance, a heavy oak door leading to a small, overgrown Victorian cutting garden now lost to the night, burst inward with a deafening crack of fractured wood and shattered hopes. A small figure, barely a smudge against the turbulent, bruised gray of the dying daylight, stumbled in, not merely entering, but flinging himself into the dubious warmth of the library, as if pursued by demons from the deepest circle of hell. He was impossibly small-looking, no older than 8 or 9, perhaps younger beneath the layers of grime and terror. He was drenched to the bone, his clothes, too thin torn and several sizes too large, clinging to his shivering, emaciated frame like a second sodden skin. Rainwater streamed from his dark, matted hair, plastering it to his forehead and cheeks. Mud, thick and cloying, caked his exposed skin and saturated his attire. He clutched a sodden, battered, leather-bound journal to his narrow chest as if it were the only solid thing in a world determined to drown him. His eyes, enormous and dark in his pale, dirt-streaked face, darted wildly around the dimly lit, cavernous expanse of the library, fixing on every shadow, every alcove, as if expecting his pursuers to materialize from the very walls. Raw, primal terror, far too old for his tender years, was etched onto every line of his young face. He gasped for breath in great, ragged, painful sobs that shook his tiny body. Eleanor's breath hitched a knot of pure dread tightening in her stomach. Her immediate instinct was to rush to him to offer comfort, but years of Mr. Finch's rigid protocols had ingrained a hesitant caution. She started to rise her own fear, a cold counterpart to the boy's evident terror, when a sharp, incisive voice, honed by years of academic condescension and budgetary parsimony, cut through the momentary hush. What, in the name of declining municipal funding and dwindling philanthropic interest, is that Mr. Alistair Finch, director of the Oakhaven Historical Society, custodian of its archives and bane of Eleanor's existence, emerged from the mahogany grandeur of his office, his posture as ramrod straight and unyielding as a Victorian whalebone corset. His thin, ascetic face, framed by meticulously groomed silver hair, was set in its customary expression of profound disapproval. His spectacles, perched precariously on his sharp nose, seemed to magnify the icy disdain in his pale blue eyes as they fixed not on the shattered door, but on the trembling child with undisguised revulsion. Finch had an uncanny, almost supernatural ability for appearing at the most inopportune moments, his mere presence capable of wilting the most robust enthusiasm or curdling the freshest cream. He was, Eleanor often thought, a walking, talking embodiment of a librarian stereotype from a particularly bleak novel. "Get it out, Miss Vance." Finch snapped his voice, a low, controlled hiss that somehow carried more menace, more chilling authority than a parade ground shout. It was the voice he used when discovering a misplaced comma in an accession report or a fingerprint on a glass display case. Immediately, this institution is a sanctuary of learning, Miss Vance, a hallowed repository of irreplaceable artifacts and scholarly pursuits, not a flophouse for common street vermin. Do you intend for us to track gutter filth all over the original parquet flooring? He'll likely try to purloin something of value, if he hasn't already. Remove it, now. The contemptuous emphasis on it left no doubt he was referring to the child as if he were a particularly unpleasant form of rodent. A hot surge of anger, a fierce protective instinct Eleanor rarely allowed herself to feel, let alone express, burned through her. This wasn't merely Finch's usual fastidiousness. This was cold, unadulterated cruelty. This wasn't the first time he had displayed his utter disdain for anything or anyone that didn't directly translate into prestigious donations, glowing newspaper articles, or an increase in his own perceived importance. "He's just a child, Mr. Finch," she managed, her voice quiet, but threaded with an unexpected firmness as she instinctively moved, placing her own body partially between the director's withering gaze and the terrified, shivering boy. "He's clearly frightened out of his wits and needs help. Look at him." Her own past failure, a deeply buried but ever-present shame, flashed in her mind's eye with painful clarity. The baffling theft of the irreplaceable Serpent's Atlas, her beloved mentor, Professor Alcott's subsequent ruin, his descent into professional and personal oblivion. She hadn't been brave enough, then vigilant enough. She had been young, inexperienced, easily intimidated. The guilt of that failure was a constant, silent companion. Finch scoffed, a dry, rasping sound like sandpaper on old parchment. "Help he requires the constabulary more like. And you, Miss Vance, would do well to remember your duties, which decidedly do not include playing Florence Nightingale to any vagrant urchin who wanders in from the storm. If that specimen is still on the premises in 5 minutes, I shall personally telephone Officer Miller and have him escorted to the municipal orphanage, or perhaps the workhouse, if such an enlightened institution still exists for these juvenile delinquents." He made a dismissive gesture, flicking an imaginary speck of dust from the sleeve of his impeccably tailored but slightly shiny tweed waistcoat. Unbelievable. The abysmal standards this city increasingly expects us to tolerate. His voice trailed off as he turned, already dismissing the crisis, and retreated towards the perceived safety of his office, muttering about declining moral fiber and the perils of unchecked philanthropy. Ignoring Finch's retreating, self-righteous form, Eleanor knelt consciously, softening her posture, her voice. "Hey there," she said, pitching her tone low and soothing as one might to a startled fawn. "It's okay. Are you all right? You're safe in here now." The boy finally seemed to focus on her, his wide, terror-filled eyes locking onto hers for a hesitant moment. His small, chapped hands, raw and red from the cold, gripped the sodden journal even tighter, knuckles white. His voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a thread of sound, hoarse with exhaustion and fear, almost lost in the continued drumming of the rain. They were chasing me. The men in the black carriage. He risked a fleeting glance back towards the splintered, violated door, and a fresh wave of fear washed over his face, making him tremble more violently. They want this. He tapped the journal with a dirty finger. From the doorway of his office, Finch, who had clearly been listening, interjected with a sarcastic echo of a word he must have misheard or willfully misinterpreted. Bread. Is that what he said? He probably desires our entire quarterly acquisitions budget as well. He reeks of the docks. Get him out, Vance, or you will face the immediate consequences. I will not have the integrity of this institution compromised by your misplaced sentimentality. The threat hung in the air, as cold and damp as the November evening. The boy flinched, as if physically struck by Finch's words, his small shoulders hunching further, trying to make himself invisible to disappear into the oaken floorboards. Eleanor made a decision, swift and resolute. Finch could rail and threaten later. Right now, this child needed sanctuary. Come with me. She whispered, her decision overriding years of ingrained subservience. She reached out slowly and took his small, icy, unresisting hand. She led him not towards the grand main exit, which Finch would undoubtedly be monitoring, but deeper into the labyrinthine stacks of the library's west wing, towards the little-used cartography and exploration section. Its towering, double-sided shelves casting long, protective, comforting shadows in the dim, atmospheric lighting. It was her unofficial domain, a quiet corner filled with forgotten voyages and hand-drawn worlds, a place Finch rarely ventured, considering it of minor academic import. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice a deliberate balm against Finch's earlier venom. She settled him into a secluded reading alcove, buffered from the main aisles by towering atlases and rolled charts of ancient coastlines. The air here smelled faintly of vanilla from the old paper and the cedar wood of the shelves. Leo, he choked out the single word, followed by a racking cough that shook his frail body. The shivering was now uncontrollable. She quickly spotted an old but surprisingly clean woolen carriage throw blanket, usually reserved for carefully covering delicate folios during transport, folded neatly on a librarian's trolley. She wrapped it around his small shoulders. It smelled faintly of dust and lavender. "And what's in that journal, Leo? Why do those men want it so badly?" Leo shook his head, his eyes still darting to the entrance of the alcove, fear a palpable presence. "Grandpa Silas," he said. "It's a secret. A very big, very important secret." He said, "Bad people want it. Very bad people." He said, "I had to run. To find someone. Someone who loves old things. Old stories. Someone trustworthy." His gaze wide and imploring met hers, a child's desperate, unspoken plea for belief, for protection. Eleanor's heart constricted. Professor Alcott had loved old things, old stories more than anyone she knew. He had been profoundly trustworthy, and he had been utterly destroyed by a secret someone else coveted. "My grandpa, Silas, I think they found him." Leo whispered the words, barely audible. Tears held back for so long by terror and flight finally began to spill, tracing unexpectedly clean paths through the layers of mud and grime on his pale cheeks. "He told me to take the journal and go to the old Seagate lighthouse by the North Docks. But they were there too, waiting. The North Docks. One of the roughest, most dangerous parts of Oakhaven, a place honest folk avoided after dark, rumored to be the haunt of smugglers' cut-purses and worse. Not a place for a terrified child clutching a mysterious journal. A sudden, loud, pointed clearing of Finch's throat echoed from the main reading room, a sound designed to carry to command attention. "Miss Vance, I trust you have dealt with our uninvited little guest. The night watchman, Mr. Grumbles, will be making his rounds shortly, and I fully expect the premises to be secured and entirely clear of irregularities." Eleanor's mind raced a chaotic jumble of fear and responsibility. She couldn't simply throw Leo back out into the storm, into the clutches of the unknown men he so clearly feared. Finch, in his self-righteous zeal, would undoubtedly call the police. And then what? The cold, impersonal halls of the Oakhaven Municipal Orphanage, a grim, soot-stained Victorian edifice she passed on her way to work, rose in her mind's eye, and her heart ached with a strange, fierce protectiveness for this waif. "Stay right here, Leo. Don't make a single sound, okay, and keep this blanket around you," she whispered, tucking it more securely around his small frame. He nodded, his eyes huge and trusting, making her resolve solidify. She had to buy some time to think, to figure out what to do. This small, terrified boy, clutching his grandfather's dangerous secret, had stumbled out of the raging storm and into her quiet, meticulously ordered, and increasingly precarious world, bringing with him a whirlwind of peril she was utterly unprepared for. But looking at his small, mud-stained, terrified face, a mirror of the vulnerability she often felt herself, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she couldn't turn him away. Not this time. Not again. Over the next tense hour, a nerve-wracking cat-and-mouse game played out. Eleanor managed to temporarily placate a suspicious and impatient Finch with a carefully constructed story of a momentarily disoriented child who had evidently mistaken the library for a public shelter, but was quickly guided back out into the street. She stressed the boy was gone, emphasizing the security of the collections. Finch, mollified by the illusion of her swift, decisive action, and eager to retreat to his warm fireside, and Sherry finally grumbled his assent and departed, leaving Eleanor with a stern warning about ensuring all doors and windows are properly secured against further such intrusions. Meanwhile, Leo, utterly exhausted by his ordeal, had fallen into a fitful, trembling sleep in the sheltered alcove, the woolen blanket pulled up to his chin, the mysterious journal lying beside him on the worn velvet cushion. The storm outside had begun to ease, the wind's howl softening to a mournful sigh. The library was quiet now, save for the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock and the occasional drip of water from a leaking gutter. With trembling fingers, Eleanor picked up the journal. It was bound in dark, heavily scuffed leather, its corners blunted with age and rough handling. There was no title, no author, just a faint, almost invisible tooling of what looked like an intertwined serpent and a compass rose. She carefully opened it. The pages were thick, creamy rag paper, now water-stained around the edges. They were filled with Silas's spidery, surprisingly elegant handwriting, interspersed with intricate hand-drawn sketches of constellations, complex tidal charts for the Oakhaven estuary, and what looked like cryptographic symbols or ciphers painstakingly inscribed next to drawings of local landmarks. The old customs house, the Mariners' Church, the infamous Crow's Nest Tavern. Many pages featured crudely but accurately drawn maps of Oakhaven's treacherous waterfront, detailing hidden channels, forgotten jetties, and old smugglers' tunnels Eleanor recognized from obscure historical texts and forgotten city plans she had studied. The men chasing Leo, she realized with a growing chill, weren't casual bullies or opportunistic thieves. This journal felt potent, dangerous. This was something significant. Marcus Thorne, a fellow archivist who specialized in Oakhaven's rich maritime history, and one of the few colleagues Eleanor felt remotely comfortable with, approached her desk as she was meticulously locking up her section for the night. He was younger than Eleanor by a few years, with an easy, disarming smile, a perpetually rumpled tweed jacket, and an air of amiable, slightly chaotic collegiality. He was also, in Eleanor's private opinion, far too charming for the dusty confines of archival work. "Rough night, Ellie?" he asked, his hazel eyes genuinely sympathetic. Heard Finch was on a particular tear earlier. Sounded like the apocalypse was nigh from the noises drifting down the hall. Eleanor forced a tired smile, trying to appear nonchalant. "Just the storm, I think, Marcus. It tends to make everyone a bit edgy." She felt a prickle of guilt at the omission. Heard some sort of commotion earlier, too, Marcus said, lowering his voice slightly, glancing towards Finch's now dark office. Something about a kid breaking in through the garden door. His tone was curious, but not overtly probing. Oh, just a misunderstanding. A child got a bit lost in the storm. All sorted out now, Eleanor said, perhaps a little too quickly. She busied herself with her ledger, avoiding his gaze. Marcus nodded slowly, seeming to accept her explanation. Well, if you ever need a sympathetic ear or a hand deciphering some particularly crabbed handwriting on an ancient ship's manifest, you know where I am. He offered a small, encouraging wink. Stay dry on your way home, Ellie. Looks like the worst of it is over, but the streets will be treacherous. Eleanor's small, chilly attic apartment, perched atop a noisy boarding house in a less salubrious part of Oakhaven, was no warmer or more welcoming than the library had been. The rain had finally stopped, but a damp, penetrating chill still clung to the air. She had managed to sneak Leo out through a rarely used service exit in the library's basement after the grizzled night watchman, Mr. Grumbles, had completed his cursory grumbling rounds. Now the boy slept deeply on her patched, lumpy sofa, one small hand still clutching the corner of the woolen library blanket she'd smuggled out along with him. The mysterious journal lay on the small, rickety table beside him, a tangible testament to a dangerous trust she felt wholly unequipped to bear. What had she gotten herself into? She looked at the faded, silver-framed photograph of Professor Alcott that stood on her small dresser. His kind, scholarly eyes seemed to look back at her with a hint of sad reproach. He had been her mentor, her academic champion, the one who had seen potential in her quiet, diligent nature. The Serpent's Atlas, a priceless, unique 16th-century manuscript detailing apocryphal sea routes and whispered of possibly mythical treasures, had vanished without a trace from a specially reinforced locked display case under his curatorship 5 years prior. Eleanor, then his junior assistant, had been the last person documented as being in the secure vault that fateful day, double-checking inventory lists. There had been no signs of forced entry. The official investigation concluded negligence, and though theft by Alcott himself was never proven, the insinuation hung heavy in the air. His distinguished career shattered, his reputation irrevocably ruined. He had faded into obscurity, dying a broken and forgotten man a few years later. Eleanor had always carried the crushing, unspoken guilt that her oversight, some unlocked drawer, some unlatched window, some momentary lapse in concentration she couldn't precisely recall, had inadvertently led to his downfall. She'd failed him, miserably. Now another precious secret-laden book had quite literally fallen into her orbit. This time she vowed, staring at Leo's sleeping form, this time she wouldn't fail. This time she would be brave. She had to be. The next morning, after a night punctuated by Leo's occasional whimpers and her own anxious thoughts, the boy was wary and subdued, but thankfully less overtly terrified. He ate the 2 slices of toast and a spoonful of precious strawberry jam she offered him with a solemn gravity, as if it were a king's banquet. He was still wearing the clothes he'd arrived in now, stiff with dried mud, and he smelled faintly of damp earth and fear. Eleanor made a mental note to find him something clean to wear, though her own wardrobe was modest at best. Grandpa Silas said Leo began, his voice small and hesitant, picking at a loose thread on the sofa, the journal. It shows where the night traders hide their things. Bad things. Stolen things. Things that belong to other people. Night traders, Eleanor asked, a shiver tracing its way down her spine, despite the weak morning sun filtering through the grimy attic window. The name sounded like something from one of Oakhaven's darker folk tales. Leo nodded, his dark eyes serious. That's what he called them. He said they meet down by the docks where the old forgotten ships used to unload their cargo in secret. By the Forgotten Key. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The Forgotten Key was notorious in Oakhaven's shadowy lore, a crumbling, treacherous labyrinth of rotting wharves and derelict warehouses, a place whispered to be the locus of dark deeds, clandestine meetings, and unsolved disappearances. Its name was often invoked by mothers to frighten misbehaving children. It was not a name one heard in polite society. Arriving at the library later that morning, the atmosphere was thick with Mr. Finch's palpable displeasure. He had called an emergency staff meeting. All three of them, including Mrs. Periwinkle, the ancient and largely decorative genealogist, at which he announced in stentorian tones a raft of new impossibly stringent security protocols and random unannounced staff performance evaluations. He made several pointed remarks about certain employees whose extracurricular activities or lack of due diligence might reflect poorly upon the esteemed reputation of this society. Eleanor felt his cold, accusing gaze on her constantly throughout the morning, making her fumble with catalog cards and spill ink on a new acquisitions form. Marcus Thorne, however, sought her out during a brief lull, his expression genuinely concerned. "Ellie, you look absolutely dreadful. Worse than yesterday. Is everything all right? I heard some absolutely wild rumors this morning about Miss Vivian Holloway's entire estate being broken into by ruffians. Probably just gossip, but, well, Oakhaven loves a good scandal involving the wealthy." "Just tired, Marcus?" Eleanor demurred, her heart giving a nervous flutter at the mention of the Holloway name. A name associated with immense wealth and almost total seclusion. This awful weather just saps all the energy. "Well, Finch is well and truly on the warpath," Marcus confided, lowering his voice and glancing conspiratorially towards the director's closed door. "He's been closeted in meetings with Councilman Julian Thorncroft for most of the morning. Thorncroft's a major benefactor, of course, and chairman of the City Heritage Committee. Something big is clearly up. Just be careful, Ellie. Keep your head down." He gave her arm a brief, sympathetic squeeze. "Remember, if there's anything at all I can do, anything, don't hesitate." His concern felt genuine, comforting even. Yet a tiny, insidious sliver of doubt planted by Miss Holloway's mention of Thorncroft during her dramatic visit years ago, a detail Eleanor had not yet shared with Marcus and a name that echoed his own, began to fester in the back of her mind. It was probably nothing, just a coincidence. Thorne was a common enough name in Oakhaven. During her meager lunch break, a stale bread roll and a bruised apple eaten hastily at her desk, Eleanor, using the Society's privileged access to historical newspaper archives and city directories, surreptitiously researched the names Night Traders and Silas Thorne. The Night Traders yielded little beyond vague folkloric references to smugglers and illicit dealings along the waterfront dating back centuries. Silas Thorne, however, was a different story. He had, it turned out, been a respected city cartographer and surveyor until a significant scandal some 10 years prior, involving accusations of falsifying official city maps and survey documents for certain unscrupulous private parties involved in waterfront property speculation. His promising career had ended abruptly in disgrace. Much like Professor Alcott's, the parallels were unsettling, too stark to ignore. The connections felt insidious, like unseen threads coiling around her, drawing her into a web she didn't understand. That evening, as she left the imposing stone edifice of the library, the gas street lamps casting long, flickering shadows, a burly man in a dark, ill-fitting woolen coat stepped out from the deeper blackness of a nearby narrow alleyway. He was nondescript in a way that was itself menacing. "Lost something important, miss?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly growl. His eyes, cold and flat like river stones, scanned her from head to toe, as if looking for something specific, something she might be carrying. He wasn't asking a question. He was making a statement. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was no random encounter. No, nothing. "Excuse me, please." She forced herself to walk past him, her pace quickening, not daring to look back, the sensation of his eyes boring into her spine. They were watching her. They knew, or suspected. She knew then with chilling certainty that she couldn't protect Leo or the secrets of his grandfather's journal alone. Her tiny attic room was no fortress. The library under Finch's suspicious eye was even less safe. There was only one person in all of Oakhaven who might possess the requisite knowledge, the necessary resources, and the sheer, indomitable force of will to help them, Ms. Vivian Holloway. Reclusive, reportedly eccentric, fabulously wealthy from old family money, and a legendary, albeit largely unseen historian, with a rumored private library that was said to rival, if not surpass, the Society's own. Gaining an audience with her, however, would be the first and perhaps insurmountable challenge. Ms. Holloway hadn't been seen in public for well over a decade and was notorious for rebuffing all callers from city dignitaries to supplicating academics. Her ivy-choked mansion, Holloway Manor, brooded on the city's outskirts like a forgotten Gothic sentinel. Eleanor racked her brain. Then she remembered. Tucked away in the Society's archives in Professor Alcott's voluminous but sadly neglected correspondence files, she recalled seeing a brief formal letter of thanks from a V. Holloway penned in a distinctive, spiky italic hand, addressed to Professor Alcott for his assistance on some obscure piece of 17th century Oakhaven maritime research. It was a long shot, a desperate gambit. Using the Society's crested letterhead, she penned a carefully worded, almost painfully formal note, appealing to Ms. Holloway's known scholarly interests. She mentioned Professor Alcott by name, alluded to an urgent need to discuss a matter of significant and potentially perilous historical import, and taking a leap of faith, added a guarded reference to the safety and well-being of a young child whose life may be in danger due to this discovery. Late that night, after ensuring Leo was asleep, she crept out and dropped the letter into the imposing lion-headed brass letterbox set into the massive stone gatepost of Holloway Manor. Then she hurried away, her hopes and fears warring within her. To her utter astonishment, a crisp, cream-colored envelope bearing a wax seal with an intricate H monogram arrived by liveried messenger at the library the very next afternoon, addressed to Miss E. Vance, archivist. Mr. Harbrice. Finch had eyed it with extreme suspicion. Inside, on thick, expensive cardstock, was a single sentence inscribed in the same elegant, spiky handwriting. T. 4 o'clock. This afternoon. Bring the boy and your historical import. Do not be late. V.H. Holloway Manor. When they arrived by hired hackney cab, an expense that made Eleanor wince was even more imposing up close. It was a fortress of weathered gray stone and creeping ivy, its mullioned windows like dark, watchful, disapproving eyes, staring out over unkempt, sprawling grounds. A stern-uniformed and unnervingly silent butler named Jennings, who looked as if he had stepped directly from the pages of a Gothic novel, led them through cavernous, shadowy halls. The air was cool and still smelling of beeswax old roses, and something else Eleanor couldn't quite place. Perhaps just the sheer weight of accumulated time. Towering bookcases crammed with leather-bound volumes lined the walls interspersed with glowering ancestral portraits, whose painted eyes seemed to follow their progress. Finally, they were ushered into a vast, unexpectedly sun-dappled conservatory, a riot of exotic, vibrant plants and blooming orchids that seemed to defy the gloomy November weather. Miss Vivian Holloway sat enthroned in a large, intricately woven wicker chair, surrounded by a profusion of impossibly hued orchids. She was older than Eleanor had imagined from the vigor of her handwriting, perhaps in her late 70s, bird-like and seemingly fragile beneath a cashmere shawl. But her eyes, the color of antique amber, were startlingly sharp, missing nothing, radiating an unnerving intelligence. Miss Vance, I presume? Punctual. I approve. Her voice was surprisingly strong, crisp and clear. And this, I take it, must be young Mr. Leo, ma'am? he whispered, clutching Eleanor's hand tightly, clearly overwhelmed by the grandeur and the imposing presence of their hostess. "Tea." Jennings, Miss Holloway commanded without looking away from them, and the silent butler materialized, as if from nowhere, with a heavy silver service, a plate of delicate cucumber sandwiches, and a tiered stand of tiny, perfect cakes. As Jennings poured, Eleanor began her story, her voice faltering at times, as she recounted Leo's dramatic arrival, the terrifying men Silas's journal, her fears for their safety. Miss Holloway listened intently, her gaze unwavering occasionally, darting to the worn leather-bound book Eleanor had placed on the polished glass table between them. Leo, encouraged by Miss Holloway's unexpectedly kind, if direct manner, even chimed in with a few details about his grandfather's warnings. When Eleanor finally finished her throat dry, Miss Holloway picked up the journal. Her slender, heavily ringed fingers, surprisingly steady, traced the faint embossed tooling on its cover. The intertwined serpent and compass rose. A strange, almost pained expression flickered across her aristocratic features. "Silas Thorne," she murmured more to herself than to them. "I knew him. Years ago. A brilliant man, a true craftsman betrayed by lesser minds and undone by their greed." She opened the journal, her amber eyes scanning the coded script and intricate drawings with an intensity that belied her age. Ah, yes. The night traders. Or, as my own grandfather, a man with a somewhat colorful past, used to call them the Blackwood Guild. Miss Holloway leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial near whisper, though her eyes blazed with a fierce, unexpected light. "My family, Miss Vance, has a, shall we say, complicated and rather lengthy history with the so-called Blackwood Guild. My own great-grandfather, a younger son with more ambition than sense, was one of its original founders back when it purported to be a legitimate society of intrepid explorers, cartographers, and international merchants. But over the generations it became corrupted, twisted from within by ambition and avarice into something predatory, something vile." Her eyes glittered with a fierce, righteous anger. "Silas Thorne. He was not one of them. He was my informant, Miss Vance. He had been working for years at great personal risk from the inside to gather enough concrete evidence, maps, ledgers, secret routes, names, to expose them fully to dismantle their far-reaching network of artifact smuggling, extortion, and worse. This journal." She tapped its worn cover with a decisive finger. "This is his life's work, his dangerous legacy, and I believe the key to their final undoing." Eleanor and Leo stared stunned into silence. An informant, not a disgraced collaborator, but a secret crusader. They killed him for it, didn't they? Leo asked, his small voice trembling but surprisingly clear. His young face suddenly hard with a premature understanding of adult cruelty. Ms. Holloway's gaze softened as it rested on the boy. "I believe so, child. With a heavy heart, I believe they did. And now, quite clearly, they want his journal back. Very badly indeed." Suddenly, the conservatory doors opened, and Jennings re-entered his usual granite-like stoicism, visibly disturbed by a flicker of genuine alarm in his eyes. "Madam," he announced, his voice a low rumble of concern, "there are gentlemen at the main gate. 2 of them. They are rather insistent on speaking with a Miss Vance concerning a misplaced child they believe she may be harboring." Eleanor's blood ran cold. How had they found them so quickly? Had she been followed from the library? Miss Holloway's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "Insistent are they, stall them, Jennings. Use any pretext." She turned back to Eleanor, her mind clearly working with sharp, decisive precision. "They are more efficient, more brazen than I had anticipated. We need to leave this house. Immediately." But it was already too late. Through the vast, elegant panes of the conservatory's glass walls, they saw two burly, menacing figures already striding purposefully up the long, manicured gravel driveway, their faces grim and set. They hadn't bothered to wait at the gate. Jennings' attempt to delay them had evidently failed or been ignored. "This way, quickly." Miss Holloway commanded, surprisingly agile for her age. She moved with an almost youthful urgency towards a towering, ornately carved mahogany bookshelf crammed with botanical treatises. She pressed a hidden catch disguised as a decorative rosette, and a section of the bookshelf swung silently inward, revealing a narrow, dusty, cobweb-festooned passage. Old house, old secrets, my dear. Fortunate are they not the grand manor moments before a symbol of imposing stability now became a treacherous maze. They scurried through dimly lit back stairs, disused dust-sheeted servants' quarters, and then, to Eleanor's alarm, found themselves briefly in the vast, echoing emptiness of the main ballroom, its chandeliers shrouded in holland covers like ghostly sentinels. The heavy, purposeful footsteps of their pursuers echoed unnervingly close from the main hall. "They know the layout of the house," Eleanor whispered, horrified. How is that possible? The guild had associates, sympathizers, even within my own family's trusted staff long ago. Some loyalties are more likely, some knowledge of the manor's secrets may persist through less scrupulous descendants, Miss Holloway said grimly, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps as she hurried them along a gallery overlooking the main staircase. They could hear voices below, harsh, guttural commands. They found themselves temporarily trapped in Miss Holloway's private library, a room larger than the Historical Society's entire ground floor, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with priceless leather-bound volumes. The main door's thick oak panels were being rattled violently from the other side. A man shouted, "Check in here. She wouldn't leave without her precious books." Leo, surprisingly calm amidst the chaos, suddenly tugged urgently on Eleanor's sleeve. "Grandpa Silas's journal," he whispered excitedly. "There's a map of this house. He drew it when he came to see her a long time ago. He told me, he said there was a secret book tunnel in her big library working together with frantic haste." Leo pointing out symbols and landmarks from his grandfather's sketches, which he seemed to have memorized with a child's uncanny accuracy, and Eleanor cross-referencing these with her own knowledge of old architectural styles and layouts. They found it not a tunnel, but a section of shelving that, when a specific sequence of 3 dummy book spines was pressed, swung inwards with a faint groan, leading to a tight, stone-lined, spiraling staircase descending into what seemed like pitch-black cellars. Just as they slipped through the narrow opening, one of the thugs, a mountain of a man, with a brutal scarred face, burst into the library through the main doors. He saw the moving shelf, the last flicker of Eleanor's skirt disappearing. "There they're in the walls," he roared. They plunged into the damp, musty darkness of the cellars, Miss Holloway leading the way, with a surprising, almost instinctual knowledge of the subterranean passages. Behind them, they heard the heavy thud of pursuit and the scrape of boots on stone. The air was cold and smelled of wet earth and something else. Ancient wine, perhaps, from long-forgotten vintages. "We need a diversion," Eleanor gasped, her mind racing, the archivist's instinct for preservation and quick thinking kicking in. The real journal, Silas's life work, was irreplaceable. But in Miss Holloway's study earlier, when they'd first arrived, she had briefly seen a plain, similarly sized, leather-bound household accounts ledger from the late 19th century lying on a side table. An idea desperate, but potentially life-saving, formed. Ms. Holloway Eleanor panted, "Is there another way out of these cellars that leads towards the old boathouse on the lake? I saw it from the driveway." The guild, if they knew the estate, would likely consider the boathouse a prime, albeit obvious, escape route. "Yes," Ms. Holloway replied, her voice tight but steady. "A service tunnel. but it's treacherous, partially flooded after these rains. Good. Even better, Eleanor said. As they hurried along a narrow, dripping passage, Eleanor quickly explained her plan. While Miss Holloway and Leo continued towards a more concealed, less obvious exit, a disused icehouse tunnel leading to the outer woods, Eleanor would double back with a decoy journal. Her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, Eleanor, guided by Miss Holloway's swift, whispered directions, found her way back to the main study via another connecting passage, a route clearly unknown to their pursuers. She snatched the old accounts ledger from the side table, quickly smudged its cover with dust from a nearby shelf, and using a stub of charcoal pencil she miraculously found in her satchel, a habit from her sketching days, rapidly scrawled some random astronomical symbols and crude, hurried map-like lines on the first few blank pages. It was a poor, hasty imitation, but in the dim light of the cellars under duress, it might just work. She rejoined the main cellar tunnel system just as the thugs' voices grew louder, closer. Making a deliberate, clumsy noise, as if stumbling, she dropped the decoy ledger near the yawning entrance to the boathouse service tunnel, then scrambled into a dank, narrow alcove piled high with rotting wooden crates, praying they would take the bait. A bright flashlight beam suddenly cut through the oppressive darkness. One of the thugs, the scarred one, grunted. Got it. Here's the book. The old woman and the kid must be headed for the boathouse after all. Let's go before they get to a boat. Eleanor waited, barely breathing, her body pressed hard against the damp stone wall, until their heavy footsteps receded down the boathouse tunnel. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she cautiously made her way back to the prearranged meeting point near the icehouse passage, where Miss Holloway and Leo waited, their faces pale and anxious, in the faint light filtering from a ventilation shaft. They had bought themselves precious time and, hopefully, a clear escape. They finally escaped the confines of Holloway Manor and its dangerous secrets through the old, nearly collapsed smuggler's tunnel that, as Miss Holloway had remembered, exited into a dense, overgrown rhododendron thicket on the estate's farthest periphery. They emerged, muddy, scratched, and exhausted, as the relentless storm finally began to abate, leaving behind a bruised, swollen, and weeping sky. Macanester. Holloway, with surprising efficiency for someone so long secluded, used a hidden mobile telephone, a modern contraption Eleanor was startled to see her possess, to arrange for a discreet, unmarked motorcar to collect them. It transported them to a small, unassuming but surprisingly comfortable safe house she maintained under an assumed name in a quiet, respectable, and utterly unremarkable residential street on the other side of Oakhaven. The close call, the visceral fear, had shaken them all profoundly. But Miss Holloway seemed, if anything, more resolute, her amber eyes burning with a renewed, almost righteous fury. They will be incandescent with rage when they discover the deception, she said, dabbing a delicate lace handkerchief at a smudge of dirt on her cheek. The guild's current leader, a man named Julian Thorncroft, a supposed pillar of Oakhaven society, a celebrated philanthropist, wouldn't you know, will not take this perceived humiliation lightly. He believes quite correctly that Silas's journal contains information that could not only ruin him and his clandestine associates, but also dismantle their entire lucrative and illicit empire. Eleanor's heart sank. Julian Thorncroft. The name echoed with familiarity. He was indeed a major benefactor of the Historical Society, a powerful and influential city councilman, chairman of numerous committees. His portrait even hung in the society's stuffy boardroom. And Thorn. Marcus Thorn. Could there truly be a significant familial connection beyond the shared surname? The thought made her profoundly uneasy. Marcus had seemed so genuinely helpful, so consistently kind. But now a cold seed of doubt had been firmly planted. Back at the library the following day, the atmosphere was thick enough to spread on toast, primarily with Mr. Finch's thinly veiled displeasure and suspicion. He announced at yet another hastily convened and poorly attended staff meeting that due to recent alarming security concerns and ongoing regrettable budget shortfalls, there would regrettably have to be further staff cutbacks in the new year. He made several more pointed oblique remarks about certain employees whose outside activities, questionable associations, or general lack of professional focus might reflect poorly upon the otherwise unblemished reputation of this venerable society. Eleanor felt his cold, critical gaze following her every move, making her already frayed nerves jangle. Marcus, however, when he caught her alone in the periodical section, seemed genuinely, almost painfully concerned for her. "Ellie, you look absolutely dreadful," he said, his voice hushed, his hazel eyes clouded with sympathy. "Are you sleeping at all? Is everything really all right? I heard some truly wild, outlandish rumors this morning about Miss Vivian Holloway's entire estate being practically ransacked by masked intruders. Police were apparently all over the place. Probably just more Oakhaven gossip magnifying a minor incident, but, well, you know how this town talks. Just tired, Marcus." Eleanor demurred, avoiding his gaze, intensely aware of the lie by omission. "This relentless damp weather just seems to sap all one's energy, doesn't it?" "Well, try to take care of yourself," Marcus urged. "Finch is well and truly on the warpath about something. He's been closeted in secretive meetings with Councilman Thorncroft again for most of the morning. Thorncroft's a major power broker in this city, pulls a lot of strings behind the scenes. Something big is definitely brewing. Just be extremely careful, Ellie. Keep your head well down." He gave her arm another brief, seemingly reassuring squeeze. "Remember, if there's anything at all I can do to help, anything, no matter how small, you only have to ask. I mean it." His concern felt so utterly genuine, his offer so sincere, that it momentarily disarmed her growing unease. Yet that persistent, insidious sliver of doubt, planted by Miss Holloway's chilling mention of Thorncroft and his ruthless nature, began to fester to grow. Over the ensuing days, Eleanor, Miss Holloway, and Leo, who displayed an astonishing, almost photographic memory for his grandfather's symbols and verbal explanations, worked tirelessly, almost obsessively, on the decipherment of Silas Thorne's journal. The safe house, though comfortable, felt like a gilded cage. The journal was a fiendishly complex cipher, a bewildering mixture of arcane astrological symbols, obscure cartographic notations, snippets of local Oakhaven folklore, and a highly personalized shorthand that Silas had clearly developed over many years. Progress was slow, painstaking. One evening, Eleanor had taken some of the less sensitive transcriptions back to the library to cross-reference with rare nautical charts in the Society's collection under the pretext of urgent cataloging work for Finch. Marcus, working late himself, approached her desk as she was meticulously comparing a peculiar symbol from the journal, a spiral within a triangle, with a faded 8th-century mariner's almanac. "Still burning the midnight oil, eh, Ellie?" he joked, leaning casually against the adjacent bookshelf, radiating his usual easy charm. "What's that you're so engrossed in? Some ancient, long-lost treasure map that's going to make you fabulously wealthy?" He peered over her shoulder with an air of friendly curiosity. Eleanor instinctively, almost reflexively, covered the page with a blotter. "Oh, just some private research, Marcus. A bit of a historical puzzle I'm trying to solve." Marcus's smile didn't falter, but his eyes lingered on the covered page for a fraction of a second too long. "Right. Of course. Scholarly pursuits. Say," he added, his tone shifting to one of thoughtful concern. "I was thinking, if you are genuinely worried about Finch's ridiculous threats, or, anything else that might be troubling you. I happen to have a distant cousin who owns a charming little shepherd's cottage up in the Adderley Hills, very remote, very peaceful, very safe, barely on any map. You and, well, anyone you might need to keep safe could easily lie low there for a while. No questions asked, just an idea." The Adderley Hills. It sounded idyllic, a peaceful rural retreat. But a memory sharp and sudden pricked at Eleanor. Silas Thorne's journal contained several rough sketches of the Adderley Hills region, and one particular heavily annotated page detailed what appeared to be a disused Blackwood Guild staging post or lookout located near an old quarry, marked with a distinctive symbol, a spiral within a triangle, a symbol Leo had emphatically identified from his grandfather's warnings as meaning danger or trap. The very symbol she had just been studying. That's incredibly kind and thoughtful of you, Marcus. Eleanor said, her voice carefully, studiously neutral, her mind reeling. I'll certainly think about it. Thank you. His eyes, still friendly, still seemingly concerned, lingered on the covered journal page for another brief, almost imperceptible moment. Just want to help Ellie. You look like you're carrying the entire weight of the world on your shoulders these days. He patted her arm again, then ambled off, whistling a jaunty little tune. Eleanor couldn't shake her profound, bone-deep unease. The coincidence of the symbol was too glaring, too specific. She discussed Marcus's unexpected offer with Ms. Holloway later that night, back at the safe house. Thorncroft's tentacles, as I've said, are far-reaching and insidious, Ms. Holloway observed grimly, her keen eyes narrowed in thought. Marcus Thorne. A charming young man, you say. Sometimes the most pleasant exteriors hide the most deceitful intentions. I will have Jennings make some discreet inquiries into Mr. Thorne's background, his finances, any potential vulnerabilities or connections. The next day back at the library, Eleanor, her heart heavy with suspicion, decided to set a small, calculated trap. She accidentally, and with apparent carelessness, left a sheet of notes on her desk blotter. The notes contained a deliberately false but plausible-sounding interpretation of a key cryptic entry in Silas's journal. One that misleadingly suggested a non-existent hidden Blackwood Guild cache of stolen valuables was located in the cellars beneath the old Oakhaven City Market, a very public, bustling, and usually well-policed area. She positioned herself behind a tall shelf of oversized folios, pretending to be absorbed in her work, but watching her desk intently through a narrow gap. Within 10 minutes, Marcus ambled past her desk, ostensibly on his way to the copying machine. He paused, glanced around casually to ensure no one was watching, then his eyes fell upon the note. He leaned over, read it quickly, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly, before he carefully replaced it exactly as it had been, walked away, whistling that same soft, jaunty little tune. He hadn't taken the bait of the note itself, but he had definitely ingested its contents. Later that afternoon, Mr. Finch summoned Eleanor into his oppressive mahogany-paneled office. Miss Vance, he began, his voice unnervingly smooth, like oiled silk, a stark contrast to his usual brusque manner. Councilman Thorncroft has, confidentially expressed, some significant concern about certain potentially destabilizing elements who might be operating from within the hallowed halls of respected city institutions such as our own. He specifically mentioned some rather outlandish rumors circulating about illicit research into particularly sensitive and perhaps best left undisturbed historical matters. Finch's gaze was sharp-pointed and distinctly accusatory. He also curiously mentioned an old wives' tale, a ludicrous piece of folklore regarding a supposed hidden cache of some sort beneath the old city market. Utter nonsense, of course. Complete fabrication. But one wouldn't want to inadvertently lend credence to such foolishness by, say, engaging in unauthorized digging or causing a public spectacle in that vicinity. Now would one? Miss Vance Eleanor's blood ran cold. Marcus hadn't just read the note. He had almost immediately relayed its contents to Finch, who was now clearly and clumsily parroting Thorncroft's thinly veiled threats and warnings. The chain of information was undeniable. That evening, as Eleanor was wearily preparing to leave the library, Marcus caught up to her by the main exit. His expression animated his smile, a little too bright, a little too eager. "Ellie, wonderful news. I spoke to my cousin. He said the Adderley Hills cottage is available immediately. Completely free for as long as you need it. Why don't you pack a bag tonight? We can drive up first thing in the morning. Get you and young Leo out of harm's way. A bit of fresh country air will do you both the world of good." His eagerness felt forced, unnatural. Eleanor stopped turning to face him fully in the dim light of the society's grand echoing foyer. "Thank you, Marcus. That's very generous. But I find I won't be needing the cottage after all." His carefully constructed, cheerful expression faltered just for a moment. "Oh, right. Why not, if you don't mind my asking? Because—" Eleanor said, her voice quiet but as cold and sharp as frosted steel. "The charming little shepherd's cottage in the Adderley Hills, according to Silas Thorne's own journal, is a well-documented and frequently used Blackwood Guild trap. A place where they lure their inconvenient acquaintances. And the information about the supposed cash beneath the city market. That Marcus was specifically for you. A little test, which I'm sorry to say you failed spectacularly." Marcus's color drained completely, leaving his usually ruddy face a sickly mottled gray. He stammered, his charm dissolving into pathetic agitation. I don't know what you're talking about, Ellie. Guild trap. You're not making any sense." "Oh, I think I am," Eleanor pressed her voice unwavering, fueled by a cold, bitter anger at his duplicity. "Or perhaps Councilman Thorncroft, who is, I believe, either your uncle or a very close family friend, given the shared, rather distinctive surname, neglected to mention that particular detail when he put you up to this. What did he promise you, Marcus, to betray a colleague to endanger a child? Enough money to cover your increasingly problematic gambling debts. Or perhaps a coveted promotion to a position that Finch, for all his faults, would never have given you. Eleanor's own quiet research, powerfully aided by Jennings's discreet but thorough findings, which Ms. Holloway had shared with her just an hour before, confirming Marcus's deep financial troubles and his undeniable, though carefully concealed, familial link to Julian Thorncroft, had painted a damningly clear picture of his motivations and his treachery. Marcus's composure shattered completely. He looked less like a charming scholar and more like a cornered rat. "You don't understand," he hissed, his voice raw with desperation, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. "Thorncroft? He's not a man you cross. He can ruin anyone. He knows things. He has eyes and ears everywhere. I had no choice." He glanced wildly around the now deserted, shadowy hallway, his face slick with sweat. "Just give me the journal, Ellie. Please. For your own good. For the boy's good, he just wants the journal. That's all. No one else has to get hurt," he promised. "You were never my friend, were you?" Marcus. Eleanor said, her voice flat with the painful weight of his betrayal, yanking her arm free from his grasp. The deceit, even half expected, stung more deeply than she could have imagined. Just then, Mr. Finch emerged abruptly from his office, looking flustered and agitated, a sheaf of papers clutched in his trembling hand. "Thorne, is there a problem here, Miss Vance? Councilman Thorncroft is on his way over. He telephoned just moments ago. He wishes to personally inspect certain recent acquisitions and discuss archival security." He sounded most insistent. Finch's eyes darted nervously between Eleanor and a now panicked Marcus, his own complicity, or at least his cowardly acquiescence, suddenly laid bare. The final ugly pieces of the puzzle clicked sickeningly into place. Finch wasn't just an officious bully. He was a terrified coward, pathetically dancing to Julian Thorncroft's tune, willing to sacrifice anyone, anything, to preserve his own petty domain and precarious position. Second major climax, the unmasking of the Blackwood Guild. In the library, Councilman Julian Thorncroft arrived not moments later, but as if on cue, sweeping into the library's foyer like a predatory bird of prey, exuding an almost tangible aura of polished, untouchable power and barely concealed menace. He was flanked by the same two burly, thuggish men who had attacked Holloway Manor, their presence in this staid temple of learning a jarring, brutal incongruity. Thorncroft himself was impeccably dressed. His silver hair perfectly coiffed his smile as smooth and cold as a well-honed blade. Miss Vance Thorncroft said, his voice a rich, cultured baritone that dripped with condescension. "So good to finally meet you in person, Miss Tobias. Finch here tells me you've been, shall we say, somewhat overzealous in your archival duties of late, and that you've, inadvertently taken possession of a certain, rather sensitive historical document. Property of the city, I believe it would be legally considered, belonging as it does to the estate of the late and thoroughly discredited Silas Thorne." He paused, his eyes like chips of ice boring into hers. "I trust you'll hand it over now, to avoid any unpleasantness." Before Eleanor could even begin to form a response, a commanding voice cut through the tense silence. Miss Vivian Holloway, looking every inch the indomitable aristocrat in a sweeping velvet cape, swept into the foyer, followed by two sturdy, grim-faced men Eleanor recognized as her highly efficient head of security and his equally formidable deputy. Leo, looking small but resolute, was safely with Ms. Holloway's trusted housekeeper, waiting in the discreet car parked just outside. Councilman Thorncroft, Ms. Holloway, said, her voice like chipped ice, clear and carrying freezing Thorncroft's oily smile in place. "How opportune of you to join us. We were in fact just about to present our rather comprehensive findings on the activities of the Blackwood Guild to Chief Inspector Davies of the Oakhaven Constabulary, who I believe is waiting patiently in my motor car at this very moment." Thorncroft's smile faltered, a flicker of genuine surprise, then anger crossing his usually impassive features. Marcus Thorne looked as if he were about to bolt. Mr. Finch turned a truly remarkable shade of pasty greenish white, looking for all the world like a forgotten relic himself. "Findings," Thorncroft scoffed, attempting to regain his composure, his voice laced with arrogant dismissal. "What possible findings could you have? Based on the incoherent, delusional ramblings of a dead, disgraced, and quite possibly mad cartographer." "Not just ramblings, Councilman," Eleanor said, stepping forward, her voice surprisingly clear and strong, despite the violent tremor in her hands. She held up a slim, neatly bound file of papers. While Silas Thorne's remarkable journal undoubtedly provided the crucial framework, there was always a vital missing piece. A cipher key, if you will. A piece I finally found, thanks to the enduring memory and intellectual legacy of Professor Alistair Alcott. Many years ago, Eleanor continued, her gaze unwavering, her voice gaining strength with every word. A unique and priceless manuscript known as the Serpent's Atlas was stolen from the secure vault of this very library. My mentor, Professor Alcott, as you well know, was blamed. His life was ruined. For years I blamed myself for some unknown oversight. But I was profoundly wrong. We were all wrong. She reached into her satchel and produced a small, tarnished, intricately shaped brass key. This morning, acting on a sudden, intuitive hunch after finally deciphering a complex astronomical notation in Silas's journal, a notation that exactly matched a specific celestial conjunction Professor Alcott was inexplicably obsessed with in the months before the atlas disappeared, I revisited the Society's archives for the Serpent's Atlas acquisition records. Tucked deep into the now empty velvet-lined slot where the atlas itself should have resided, I found this small key. And more importantly, a folded, almost disintegrated note from Professor Alcott himself, hidden within a false bottom of the case. She held up a fragile, yellowed piece of parchment, Alcott's familiar spidery handwriting clearly visible. "The serpent has coiled too tightly around its prey," it read. "Its own tail shall prove its undoing. The lockbox containing the venom is concealed beneath the central compass rose inlay of the city surveyor's original 1888 Oakhaven development plans." Professor Alcott didn't lose the Serpent's Atlas through negligence, councilman. He hid a critical part of it. He knew the guild, under your family's insidious leadership even then, was closing in on him, that they desperately wanted the Atlas, because its older forgotten sections detailed their earliest, most damning smuggling routes and clandestine operations. He couldn't protect the entire book from their reach, so he ingeniously extracted the most vital, incriminating section. A unique map legend, a list of founding guild members and their secret identifying marks. And concealed it, leaving a complex coded clue he clearly hoped someone trustworthy, meticulous, and familiar with his particular intellectual passions would one day find. Her eyes met Thorncroft's, and for the first time, she saw not arrogance, but a flicker of genuine animalistic fear. The lockbox, which Ms. Holloway's capable associates retrieved from the city archives less than an hour ago, contained not only the missing legend, crucial to fully deciphering Silas Thorne's journal entries, but also incontrovertible documentary proof. Names, dates, transactions, including your grandfather's councilman as a principal architect of the guild's corruption, and damningly your own as its current ruthless head. The key from the hidden lockbox linked to the Serpent's Atlas unlocked the final, most deeply encrypted codes within Silas Thorne's journal. Together, they revealed a breathtakingly detailed tapestry of decades of criminal activity, shipping manifests for smuggled antiquities, records of extorted payments, ledger entries for hidden offshore accounts, and even copies of compromising correspondence directly implicating Thorncroft and his extensive, previously untouchable network. Thorncroft, his mask of civility finally shattering, lunged not for the journal or the file, but with a savage snarl directly for Eleanor. "You meddling little archive—" His lunge was cut short. Ms. Holloway's two security men, moving with practiced, almost balletic efficiency, intercepted him, smoothly restraining his arms in an unbreakable grip. The two thugs who had flanked Thorncroft hesitated for a fatal second, and then visibly deflated as several uniformed police officers led by a stern-faced Chief Inspector Davies entered the library foyer briskly behind Miss Holloway. Leo, who had slipped in quietly with the Chief Inspector, his small face alight with a mixture of fear and righteous triumph, pointed a small, brave, unwavering finger directly at a cowering Marcus Thorne. He tried to trick us. He told us about a safe cottage in the hills, but Grandpa's journal said it was a horrible trap. And he kept looking at Grandpa's special book when he thought no one was watching. Marcus Thorne crumbled, babbling incoherently about gambling debts and terrible threats from powerful men. Mr. Finch, his face a mask of horrified disbelief, simply stared aghast as his meticulously curated world of petty tyranny and carefully maintained respectability imploded around him in a truly spectacular fashion. It seems Councilman Thorncroft, Ms. Holloway, said, her voice ringing with a clear, cold note of triumph, as the police inspector formally cautioned Thorncroft that your nefarious Blackwood Guild is well and truly unmasked. And its reign of terror over Oakhaven is finally at an end. The subsequent downfall of the Blackwood Guild sent shockwaves through the complacent, tradition-bound city of Oakhaven. Thorncroft, despite his wealth and influence, was arrested, his political career and vast criminal enterprise lying in ruins. Finch, his complicity and cowardly obstruction exposed, was summarily dismissed from his directorship of the Historical Society. In disgrace, his pension revoked. Marcus Thorne, facing a litany of charges for his role in aiding the guild and obstructing justice, tearfully confessed his involvement, hoping for leniency. The priceless stolen artifacts, whose illicit smuggling routes were meticulously detailed in the combined evidence of Silas's journal and the recovered Serpent's Atlas fragment, began to be traced and recovered from prestigious private collections, shadowy auction houses, and secret climate-controlled warehouses across the globe. Professor Alistair Alcott's name was officially and very publicly cleared. His genius, his integrity, and his courageous foresight were posthumously recognized, a small measure of justice for a life unjustly ruined. The recovered portion of the Serpent's Atlas, along with Silas Thorne's journal, became potent symbols of their quiet, scholarly heroism. Eleanor Vance, the quiet, unassuming archivist, found herself an unlikely and deeply uncomfortable local hero. She shunned the limelight, preferring the familiar quiet of the archives. Sona Mavars, lost. Vivian Holloway, true to her word and her re-energized sense of purpose, established the Alcott Thorne Foundation for Historical Preservation and Ethical Artifact Recovery. Its multifaceted mission to protect endangered cultural heritage, to actively investigate and expose illicit trafficking networks, and to support independent scholars and whistleblowers who dared to speak truth to power. She promptly and irrevocably offered Eleanor the pivotal role of its first executive director. "You possess the keen, analytical mind of a true scholar," Miss Vance. Ms. Holloway had said, her amber eyes surprisingly warm. "And as you have amply demonstrated, the courageous heart of a lioness. This vital ongoing work requires both those qualities in abundance." Leo, now safe, cherished, and visibly thriving under Miss Holloway's surprisingly tender and devoted guardianship, a distant, uncaring blood relative having been quickly found, and even more quickly deemed entirely unsuitable for his ongoing care. And education became a frequent, joyful visitor to Eleanor's new sunlit and comfortably appointed office at the Foundation. The Foundation, fittingly, was headquartered in a beautifully restored and expanded wing of the Oakhaven Historical Society itself. The society, under new, enlightened, and ethically rigorous leadership, was slowly but surely rebuilding its tarnished reputation. Months later, the Alcott Thorne Foundation held its inaugural fundraising gala, a glittering affair that drew scholars, philanthropists, and city dignitaries from far and wide. Eleanor, no longer the hesitant, self-doubting woman haunted by past failures and present anxieties, stood at the polished mahogany podium. She wore a simple but elegant deep sapphire gown, a thoughtful gift from Ms. Holloway. But her true adornment was the quiet, unshakable confidence that now radiated from her. "History," she began, her voice clear and steady, resonating through the grand, crystal-chandeliered ballroom, "is not merely a passive collection of dusty objects, faded documents, and forgotten names. It is a living, breathing narrative, a vast, intricate tapestry, woven with threads of human courage, catastrophic betrayal, immutable truth, and astonishing resilience. It teaches us not only who we were, but guides us, if we are willing to listen, toward who we can, and indeed must aspire to become. But this precious, often fragile narrative must be actively protected, its integrity fiercely defended against those who would seek to warp, silence, or corrupt it for their own selfish purposes. For greed, for power, for an escape from accountability." Her gaze swept over the assembled audience, lingering for a warm moment on Leo, who sat at Ms. Holloway's right hand, beaming at her with undisguised adoration. He still carried a small, new leather-bound journal, a gift from Eleanor, now filled not with dangerous secrets, but with his own imaginative drawings, stories, and observations. Professor Alistair Alcott and Mr. Silas Thorne. Eleanor continued, her voice resonating with deep respect, believed implicitly in the enduring power of truth. They understood with a scholar's insight that sometimes the smallest, most overlooked clue, the most insignificant detail, can unlock the most profound secrets, can unravel the most elaborate deceptions. They courageously entrusted their dangerous legacies to the uncertain future, hoping, praying that someone someday would be willing to listen, to understand, to act. Tonight, we honor their extraordinary sacrifice, their quiet heroism, by solemnly promising to continue that vital work, to be ever vigilant, to be unfailingly brave, and to strive always to ensure that history's authentic voice is never silenced, never distorted, never lost. After the sustained applause had finally faded, Christian Marlowe, Ms. Holloway's astute and discreet head of security, now also a trusted friend and invaluable advisor to Eleanor at the Foundation, approached her with a congratulatory smile. "A truly remarkable speech, Eleanor. You have, without a shadow of a doubt, found your true calling." Eleanor smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Perhaps it found me, Christian. With a little unexpected help from a very brave small boy and a very old, very dangerous book." Later that evening, as the gala began to wind down, she stood on the stone terrace overlooking the moonlit city, the cool night air a welcome balm. Nongskip. Holloway joined her, a companionable silence settling between them. "Professor Alcott would have been extraordinarily, immeasurably proud of you, Eleanor, as indeed am I." "Thank you, Vivian." Eleanor said, the former stiff formality between them long since softened into a genuine, deep friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. A young, slightly flustered intern from the Foundation hurried onto the terrace, clutching a cylindrical package. "Ms. Vance, Director. My sincere apologies for the interruption, but this just arrived by special international courier. Well, it appears to be another old map, and a rather cryptic note." The intern handed her the stiff cardboard tube and a sealed envelope. The note, penned in an unfamiliar, spidery hand on cheap, foreign-looking paper, contained only a few chilling lines. "The serpent shed its skin, but other vipers still lurk in the shadows. The known Canary Islands chart of Captain Mad Jack Tanner is a carefully crafted lie. Look deeper. The real treasure was never gold." Eleanor exchanged a long, significant look with Miss Holloway. Her eyes, once shadowed by guilt and uncertainty, now sparkled with keen intellectual interest and a familiar, energizing thrill of impending challenge. The past, it seemed, was inexhaustible in its supply of secrets, and the present equally abundant in its challenges. She was no longer merely an archivist tasked with passively preserving stories written by others. She was an active participant in an ongoing narrative, a shaper of its unfolding next chapter. With a steady hand, she carefully unrolled the ancient, crackling parchment chart. A new puzzle complex and intriguing lay bare before her. A new truth buried deep beneath layers of history and deception was waiting to be painstakingly unearthed. She felt a surge of anticipation. The vital work of protecting history and safeguarding its often inconvenient truths was, she now understood, never truly done. And she, Eleanor Vance, was finally, unequivocally equipped for the task. The fight continued,